Turn up your mics. It's the C Word.
Hello and welcome. You are listening to the C Word, where we explore current affairs and culture. I am your host, Hina, and today we kick off episode 4 in our series with Breeder Steve, a legend in the world of cannabis. Steve, for anyone who's joining us for the first time, his background includes pioneering in cannabis genetics. Steve is known for developing both indoor and outdoor grows with a focus on hardiness and innovation. So let's give a warm welcome to our guest, Breeder Steve. How are you, Steve?
Great, and thanks for the kindness.
We've been really interested in looking at Stars and Stripes and looking at the forum.
I had taken a long hiatus from releasing seeds, so this year was really the first time in almost 20 years probably that I've released some seeds, and they weren't something I had really totally done myself. They're with a partner in Thailand, with some old friends there. So I wanted to come out under a new label. I've been thinking of different names for seed brands and came up with a few for different purposes. They're cultivars, and the seeds may be different accessions. I like to just say seed lines, often for...
Oh, okay.
I just say seed lines.
I used to say cultivars.
Yeah, cultivars is perfect too. A clone only, a single unique plant, or it can mean seeds, where you can say a cultivar could be a hybrid or it could be a stable variety. It's not really a variety until it's stable, So and most everything out there is polyhybrids, which are hybrids with hybrids. And that's why the pheno hunting is such a big thing, is because you can buy 10 seeds and none of them look the same, If it's a really good plant, it will stand the test of time. And those cuts will be out there for a long time generally. Now, it was a little more challenging under Prohibition because they wouldn't be spread as far and openly as they will when it's legal, right? So they can be lost due to Prohibition pressures, people getting busted and losing their plants. And there's been genetics lost that way, undoubtedly, So, the goal of Prohibition was essentially the extinction of a species, which, no one has the right to legislate the extinction of a species. If the cops want to go ripping out plants, they can start with the poison ivy and move up to the poison oak, There's useful things they could be doing, but hassling herbalists isn't it, That's just uncivilized. The law can be wrong. It's been an instrument of injustice, from times of slavery, right? Slavery was legal. Doesn't make it right, Cannabis prohibition is just a symptom of, the statist overreach everywhere.
What history books would you recommend? Because one of the biggest problems with media and publishing as it is today, what books would you recommend for gardening or wanting to learn more about plants?
Boy, that's a great question, because I haven't been looking at any of the new ones. But when I started out for growing cannabis in particular, but do you mean gardening in general?
Yeah, the principles of good grow.
I think it's important to get a bit of a spread of knowledge, and you can read up and study hydroponics to understand the minerals salt world and, how the plant uses it and everything like that. The hydroponics is a really good thing to learn, but it's not my first love, let's say. I really prefer living water systems or living soil systems, and I like to grow things very biologically. And for my homegrown, I mostly just use my kitchen compost. I might buy some dolomite lime and some bone meal or something like that, but it's mostly what is used is gathered from the kitchen or the backyard, like if I'm composting leaves that fell and stuff like that. So I'll build the soil out of anything I can sort of wildcraft it even, like charred logs. A charred log is full of potassium. The charred logs are free. Right, why buy that? To me, I'd just rather break up a charred log and throw the chunks in a pot, and it's good to go. Then you just add water because you've thrown everything you wanted in that pot to begin with. And then as it's breaking down, it's feeding life in the soil, all these different components, whether it's avocado skins or banana peels or coffee grinds. You got worms in the soil, you got those little potato bugs in the soil. It's all breaking down and eating stuff. And I'll have maybe some clover growing around the top of it too, or mint. I grow like sweet mints out of it because like Elysium, the sweet mint is known or proven anyway with wine grapes and vinifera to increase the sweetness levels in the ones that's planted around, and I've always just found grapevines and cannabis to have a lot in common, even they're not the same, but they have a lot in common. So I thought, man, if it works for grapes, that the mint increases the sweetness in it, it's worth a try, right? It doesn't hurt to have them growing there. And also banker plants. So I like to put out a lot of banker plants that, like kale. I use sweet kale, and the aphids would go to the kale. And there'd be so many aphids on the kale, but none on the cannabis. And then when you get that high density food source for like wasps like to eat the aphids. So then they start building a nest nearby. They eat all the pests in my garden, you know. So I used to put up in my fields, like bat houses with a ledge for the wasps to build under. So because wherever there was a covered ledge, the wasps would just show up and build a nest. But then having the bat boxes there with a slope out gave us, bats, because we'd have lights on in the field in the tropics to keep some fields in vegetative states, like lighting up a soccer field so they don't flower. Then when you turn it off, because you're on the equator, it's always 12-12 neutral photoperiod. So even if you have that light come on for half an hour at midnight every night, that'll stop them from flowering. But it attracts so many bugs. So you get moths showing up, and then the moths start laying their eggs, which hatch into caterpillars in your flowers. But you get the wasps come along, and they go and eat them. They take the caterpillars out of the buds. I even had pictures of this. That the wasps would take the little caterpillars out of the buds, the moth worms or whatever they're called, and then they would lay their eggs in them and encase them in balls of mud. So you'd find like underneath pots or a tray or something in the greens, you'd find all these mud balls, like the size of a little marble. There would be like lines of them, like almost a honeycomb of them. And you said, what are all these little mud balls? And they're what the wasps laid their eggs in, you know? So it's like really neat to see the natural processes. And sometimes you'll find rather than trying really hard to control something through sprays and stuff, it's more just a matter of letting a natural equilibrium find its way, with the predators. And the predators won't occur until there's a food source. But once there's a food source, then the predators will go to work. And they may never get rid of 100% of it, because then they'd be out of food, but they might knock it down to a manageable level, let's say, And if you're growing tons, you got to expect there's going to be a few bad apples in the bunch, and that's just quality control issue later, So I wish I could think of specific books, but there's people that talk about, there's some people are big fans of Rudolf Steiner's biodynamic school of thought. And I think there's a lot of good in that, but I don't follow that religiously, And then there's other, experts in the field of regenerative agriculture. And you could go down that rabbit hole, just search regenerative agriculture, and you can learn a lot right there. Like nowadays, there's so much online. I'm constantly researching online, and I don't read books anymore. Like I used to read books like crazy. I have a degree in English literature. I went mad reading, but I don't have a lot of fresh recommendations, let's say. But definitely learn about regenerative ag if you're going to be growing in soil. Definitely learn about aquaponics, because to me, that's the height of horticulture. My favorite thing is growing them aquaponics. And hydroponics, just for the basic understanding I like it because you could dial in if you're blending your own nutrients from scratch, with every every salt, if you can dial in what a specific plant needs, you can say, because they don't all feed the same, right? So if you've got different ones, you may want to fine tune exactly what makes this one happiest and pinpoint the formula for it in very easily quantifiable salts. Whereas you can go to ape that balance in a bio situation, but it's harder to read because you're testing, when you're testing for the nutrients, it's what's available that second when you're making the test. Whereas the bio stuff's just a process of constantly breaking down. So it's not getting used up quite the same way, So it's not showing as much available at that second as the salts would be, which are totally bioavailable, right? So the bio growing too, I think there's more depth, I think, to the flavors. Like you can grow them straight with salts, and you think of those like tomatoes in the supermarket that are really bland, Yeah, you grew a tomato. It's not the best tasting tomato, it's kind of bland, right? Whereas you grow one out of the compost in the sunshine, and you're like, wow, that's the sweetest tomato. That's so rich, And you can check the sweetness of the juice with a refractometer and check the bricks, and people will check cannabis leaves for, they'll juice a drop, put it on a refractometer, and test the sweetness for the health of the plants and that, There's, you can just keep going down so far in so many rabbit holes when it comes to growing. But I think it's really, behooves everybody to learn about each of the paradigms. And they might say, well, I'm not going to worry about learning greenhouse growing, which will have its own thoughts, but you get the basics, you can kind of apply them anywhere, and you'll have to adjust based on where you're going. But overall, like the feeding will probably be the same, It's not going to change that much. The pH that each of your different plants likes isn't going to change so much whether it's outside or inside, But some plants will react better to artificial light. Some plants react better to sunlight. You'll definitely see, if you took say you had a new line of seeds that you made and you crunched a couple things and so I'm going to plant 1,000 of these indoors in rock wool with salt and grow them under lights. I take another 1,000 and pick the best one outside, you're going to end up with a different plant anyway, because they're from different, they started with the same seeds, but every seed is a snowflake to some degree. It's going to be a little bit its own unique plant, right? So it might even be a phenotype thing where you might have 3 or 4 phenotypes, like tall and short and purple or green, so you could have any combination of those, right? So you say, oh, well, the short purple ones work great inside, but the tall green ones really performed outside, So you'll see different things in different environments, that they're different plants just better acclimated for different environments. The more seeds you start, the better chance you have. So it's really just down to a numbers game at the end of the day, and repetition. Like if you took 100 different seed lines to a new place, I'm going to Ghana next. My next project's in Ghana, so I'll be taking several hundred seed lines there at least, and some of them I'll probably just have like 20 seeds of. Some of them I might have 2,000 seeds of. I'm going to put them all out to test to get going. Anything that's respectable in that environment, I'll make more of, and maybe work to stabilize those. But I'll also be crossing them at the same time, because I might say, the local varieties they call Ghana Gold, And still within Ghana, there's many variations, and also there's tons of hybridized stuff, mostly seeds that, Ghanaians brought back from Europe if they were in the UK or in Holland or somewhere. So it's hard almost, I think, or getting harder to see the pure Ghana gold lines than it is to find hybridized stuff. But the hybridized stuff's a mess. And we've seen the photos coming back because I have collectors over there right now that are actually, professional plant collectors that are inspecting different places and interesting people, academics from a plant institute, and they're kind of jumping the shark to get out there and start seeing what's what. And they're sending me pictures and collecting seeds. And we're going to see some interesting things at Stars and Stripes from Ghana soon. So I'm excited about that, and especially the pure Ghana gold. And, there's a need, like the Ghana gold, it's been adapted there for who knows how long, millennia potentially, right? So it's very acclimatized to the conditions. It's growing at 2 degrees off the equator, 2 degrees north. You've got rainy seasons and dry seasons, which certainly affect your crop seasons. But anything you're bringing from outside that's not acclimatized, like the indoor lines, so maybe we say, well, we're going to be selling seeds, so we want to make some popular indoor seeds as well. But they might also have some merit to be crossed with the Ghana ones and then sorted out, because initially, the best example of this for like tropical pressure that they're not up to, the most visual glaring example right away is Septoria or Pseudocercospora, which are a fungus that comes out of the soil and attacks the leaves. Equatorial plants they've evolved with it and have some resistance to it. But the plants from temperate climates have never seen that fungus. They've seen other fungus, but they haven't seen those hot weather tropical fungus. So as soon as you start planting those in the open down there, they have no natural resistance and they get these spots all over the leaves. And they even, the septoria can be like circular rings, or the pseudocercospora, they're splotchy. They're kind of what we think of as rust, if you see rust on a plant, So the native ones aren't getting it because they've evolved to resist, so they have the resistance. But because you can separate the populations, so let's say you start sequencing them, you could group A and B for these plants all had it. So if you say we crossed indoor hype number 1 with this old Ghana gold, and we cross those, when we grow them out, we're going to find half of the plants have the resistance and half of the plants have no resistance. So we could group those and call them group A and group B, and we could send leaf petioles, which are you just punch out the little stalks of the leaves, the petioles, and clean them with alcohol so that they have no trace of THC or anything. And then they're just considered genetic material for lab testing. So you can send those to a lab, and there's various labs you can use. And you could say, what's the difference between A and B? They're all sisters. What's the difference? And they'll scan the 50 samples of this and the 50 samples of that. And they'll say, oh, they're all the same except right here. This part of the chromosome, this marker, this plasmid is different, So you say, okay, so this one means it has resistance. This one means it doesn't have resistance. So then in the future, when you're going to make selections, if you have the ability to do, high throughput testing at a good rate, then you can start making your selections for certain criteria at a younger age before you've grown them all out. And that might be the chemo type. It might be, hey, we're looking for ones that have the bubblegum smell, you know, we know this is the marker for it, you know, so even when the plants are this tall, you could be starting to test them to say which one's going to have the most bubblegum smell or which one's going to have the most THCP in it, you know, some obscure cannabinoids. You can find the marker for that. And then, so then you're doing lab assisted selective breeding, which, you know, people have been doing that for quite a while already. It's like Hortifarm in Holland was doing that in the late 90s, early 2000s. They were, um, they isolated 9 cannabinoid profiles, I think. So they made like 9 stable chemotypes that were only one cannabinoid per plant. So they didn't have a spectrum of cannabinoids in it. It would just be all CBDV, all THCV, all CBD, all THC, you know, or CBG, you know. So these, you know, there's not a new thing to do. It's just there's more people doing it and in more environments. So a greenhouse in Holland, the plants that work well there aren't necessarily going to be useful for growing out 1,000 hectares on the equator. You might not be able to use those seeds. You might be able to cross them with the equatorial stuff and then pick out the ones that are, hey, that's got the chemotype we want and the resistance we want, you know, let's try and stabilize this plant, you know, so you can develop ones for certain purposes. So we're going to develop plants which are for our own production, for our own medical production. So we might not sell those genetics. You know, we might develop genetics for, you know, proprietary use. But on the other hand, we also want to be in the genetics market and developing stuff for the genetics market.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
What would you call automated systems looking after cannabis? So, you know, you can see how much blue light a plant needs or how much, you know, infrared it may need. Like the
Yeah, I
plant can
haven't
talk
used
to you.
those lights, but I've seen them. I've visited gardens that had them, and they have like an infrared eye. It's more than infrared, perhaps, but it's at least infrared eye that is attached. You know, it's part of the light fixture, and it reads the canopy. It reads what the light is on the canopy, and it also reads the plant somehow. I haven't looked into it in great detail, so I'm not really an expert on it. Definitely not an expert on it. But it exists, and you know that because I've seen it. The guys had all the data from this light is on their computer, and it knows. You know, I think they were testing it out for the manufacturer at the time because this was a while ago, 7, 8 years ago, and they said it could tell if the plant could take more light, it would increase the light itself, you know? And if it was like starting to cook the plant, it would dial down the light. So it was a variable, you know, controller, but it's automatic, you know, it's brilliant, really. But there, I haven't been following the tech advances in indoor growing that much because I never focused on it commercially. I can appreciate that it's an awesome hobby. I had nothing against that. And I don't care if people want to grow it commercially too, that's their business. But to me, it's the Special Olympics of growing. Like it can win a consistency though. Like you can really dial in the temperature. I know, but I mean, you pay for it. So a lot of places used to, in the black market days, a lot of warehouses in British Columbia, for example, they would just operate in the fall, winter, and spring, and then shut down for the summer because it's too hot and it costs too much to air condition it. Because you're generating a lot of heat with the lights back then, because we were using high pressure sodiums, not LEDs. So nowadays, a lot of people use LEDs. So they maybe don't have to pay as much for their aircon, but overall indoor growing just uses so much power that to me it's just the cost of that power makes it inefficient. If you had free power, ever, you know, but if you've got to pay for the power, it's very expensive to grow indoors. So the cannabis has to cost a lot more. And it makes sense for doing some seed work and stuff. I'll always need some indoor rooms for that, or prefer having it. Need is I can get away without them, but they're handy to have some pollination chambers for test batches and stuff like that. Or if you want to do some stress testing and leaving plants in the dark for 2 or 3 days and then the lights on for 2 or 3 days and just messing them up to try and force them to hermaphrodite. And then if they do, then maybe they're not plants you want to use as a reversal or making fem seeds with, because if they have a propensity to hermaphrodite under stress, you'll just get more hermaphrodites and more hermaphrodites if you use those in the seed production runs. So it's a great idea to stress test plants before you go into production if you can. Light stress is just one of the ways, and then there's also heat stress is another good way, or drought stress. All of those you can do in a little closet, so it's good to have the ability to check stuff out. And also you can grow some picture perfect, not a hair out of place kind of cannabis because it looks good. And what sells seeds is photos, videos and photos, or spinning, 360 photos of the bud turning around, and it has to look really perfect, and it can't have like leaves that are bent from the wind and stuff. It's nice to have some indoor for that alone. But still, you can grow beautiful weed in the greenhouse. You can grow beautiful weed outside. And again, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, So I love to see a beautiful outdoor bud growing with trees around and blue skies and clouds. And I mean, to me, I prefer being outside than in a warehouse. I had made my mind up about that a long time ago. Plus, the best of the best herbs I've ever grown or had have been the best of the best outdoor I've had, So I can grow really dynamite indoor. I know lots of people can, but I've never had any indoor that rocked my world the same way that the very best outdoors I've done has. So outdoors is a gamble every time because you have zero control over the weather, right? So one thing I'd like to do that I do with my personal plants, and I've done commercially, is what I call cheater outdoor, where I just keep the rain off and have like a cover up over the plants, so you need airflow. But if you can keep the rain off them, that gives you outdoor a much bigger shot at winning. But true outdoor, you have, you know, it's outdoor. Like they could be planted in the ground. They have no walls. They have all the wind coming through. They're just not getting rained on. So that makes a difference. But with big, fields like that, I never had them covered. I do some covered areas maybe, but I want to me, the shift is always about moving, from the horticultural paradigm to achieve mechanized agricultural paradigm, where you're using mechanized agriculture just as you would for typical grain crop. It's really, if you look at barley or rye or something like that, cannabis is in that family. It has the seeds there. You grow it. If you plant them high density, the seeds all tight together, they just grow a straight piece up with one flower full of seeds, right? So if you can combine that, and you can I've seen there's specialized combines coming that are gentler with the flowers, that had to cross them like this and then carry the flowers up. So there's going to be improved ways of mechanized harvesting, but still is mainly thought of, I think of that more for an extract situation. Whereas if you're going to harvest it for actual flowers, you kind of want to do it by hand and take care not to bruise the flowers, same way as you would with a soft fruit, like you're harvesting peaches or something. You want to be gentle with it, right? So the thing is, for extracts and hash, you still want to be gentle with it, but it's a little less of a concern because it's all going to be oatmeal soon. It's going to be all mixed up. So it's mostly the time lapse from cutting it to extracting it that is your quality difference. Not you don't want to thrash it if you can help it, and then you'll get all the resin just stuck to the machine anyway. But if you can cut it and get it into a refrigerated trailer, or a trailer that somebody's chucking dry ice into, and you do that fresh frozen right out of the field, and you're dumping trailers behind, have tractors taking away the full trailers from the combine, and another tractor pulls up and its trailer gets filled, just like you're harvesting grain on a massive scale somewhere. And if those trailers can be back and dumped in 15 minutes, you can conceivably, with a fresh frozen sift approach and rosin, you could be soil to oil in under an hour. That was kind of my mantra for the large places I'm designing, is I'm trying to get the harvest down from soil to oil in under an hour, and if I can achieve that, that's my goal. And that's for preservation, getting it done quick. And it's still very ambitious. I mean, even if I hit 2 hours, it's still beautiful. It's still beautiful. But my goal is soil to oil in under an hour. And that would be to produce extracts, high quality, like the top quality extracts that people love are the fresh frozen solventless. So by freezing and tumbling the fresh plants as they come in, you have a line. You don't have people working. It's all mechanized. So a trailer would dump that. It would go into a hopper that's got a screw. It's taking it up here. Then it goes through a bucking system where it's also maybe pulling off a lot of the big leaves, but it's pulling all the bud off the stalks. It's kind of two things. One is the bucking, where it pulls everything off the stalk. And then you can have a slotted cylinder that has a light vacuum and cutters, so that it pulls the long leaves that hang out from the bud. They can hang through that cylinder and get ripped off, or cut off. And then you've got all this fresh bud that's going into a chilled tumbler that might be the size of a cement mixer. And you might keep the temperature at minus 14 and just have like an injector for liquid nitrogen. So it's not minus whatever 75, but you're just putting in enough to keep it to minus 14, which I find to be a sweet spot for tumbling. And then the fresh hash, the resin that drops through there, can either be squished right away, or you could have that also graded, so that you're maybe the best grade of the hash you'd keep separately for hash, and then the other grades would drop to be squished, potentially through a roller system that will just have a wave of rosin coming off of it. So it's a continual press, So basically a belt press on its side even, So, but people aren't quite there selling that machinery yet, so you pretty much have to design your own for it. So that's been fun to play with on the bench scale and design, hey, this is what I want to do to process a ton a minute, or a ton every 10 minutes or something. Like, what is the throughput I can get? So you're always playing with logistics and fantasizing about scaling it up, and making it, because that's what's going to happen, because it comes down to efficiency at the end of the day. And if you can start squishing out high grade rosin and selling it for the price of peanut butter instead of, rare perfume, it's going to be widely accessible. The average person that now, they smoke grass because they can't afford to smoke live rosin, or they don't think they can afford it, or maybe they really can't, but it is seen as more of a treat or as a luxury good. And sure, there are people that drink vintage champagne every day, but we don't all drink vintage champagne every day, So, but we could make it accessible. So it could be cheaper. So right now it's 10 times more than flour, right? If we did this at a vast mechanized agricultural scale and still kept it to a high grade, it could be 10 times less than flour, because it's not done by hand. right? And the flower will always have to be hand trimmed to look any good, really well. There's some machine trimming does okay. It's really it's how it's used as well. If the plants are too dry, the machine trimming will really mess them up because they'll knock all the hash off them. And so machine trimmed is frowned upon, so it will never be the very top shelf, will always be hand trimmed. You could have some pretty damn nice stuff that's machine trimmed if you know what you're doing with it, but not everybody does. But to me, it doesn't matter. I as much as I love and respect the flower, I prefer the best quality hash and extracts from it. And depending on the flower, some of it's just better as flower because of what it is. But a lot of things today, you can enjoy them better in their purified form, the concentrated form. And it's really easier on the constitution. It's just better for your lungs and far more effective to, dab or vaporize a little grain of rice than to smoke a cigar. You're vaporizing something the size of a grain of rice. It's just plant essence. Doesn't have the paraffins or chlorophyll or fibers, just the flavors, aromas, and the cannabinoids. And that's all you're getting in that concentrate.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
I think you were interested in that Seeds of Anarchy, and I've gone in a big, big, long circle talking about the new brand. Anyway, here we are back to the Seeds of Anarchy thing.
Well, I was reading for Ego Punch, the parents you crossed, is it Legendary Mother OG Punch with Candy
Legendary OG Punch. That's right. So the first release of seeds from the Thai project were pollinated. They're feminized seeds that were pollinated by a reverse candy slurricane. And I selected that one to be the pollen parent due to its appearance and vigor, and it has some sweetness to it, which I'm always a sucker for the sweet ones. It was, decent resin producer, which is always nice. As pure a hash person, you want to see lots of visible resin, and but overall vigor in it. The Candy Slurricane, it has some Godbud in it from Jordan of the Islands, another BC breeder from way back. And his Godbud's really well known. It's a very, very vigorous plant, and it's very mildew resistant. Remind me of my Sweet Tooth 4. Is a very similar plant, leaf shape and everything. Both of them totally mildew resistant, So he's a coastal grower, and that's a huge feature on the coast where it's cold and wet. Mildew's really bad thing. So the Godbud brings mildew resistance to anything it's crossed with. Maybe not every plant in the offspring, but a certain amount of them will have it. So it was nice to see. It was nice to see a BC line, because I didn't bring it over there. It was all stuff that my friends had found or were gifted in Thailand. So we never imported those seeds or anything. They just ended up with us. And it was like, oh, something from BC. And it was kind of modernized, having the slurricane crossed into it and whatnot. So it was like an elevated Godbud, let's say. So I was like, this is decent pot. It wasn't I wouldn't say it was the strongest one, but it wasn't the weakest one. It had a decent potency, and it seemed like a fair choice for a potential pollen parent. The Legendary OG Punch was one of my top picks because in the greenhouse we're growing, which is in the plains of Thailand, which is lowland, hot, humid area. So it's a greenhouse, even hotter and more humid. So it was in very challenging conditions that we were making selections. We were making selections from about 130 different lines, I think, the first year, and then probably checked another 50 in year 2. But of those first ones, there was 4 or 5 that really stood out to me, and Legendary OG Punch was one, because contrary to what pictures of it would look like online that I'd go to see, just probably due to the conditions, this one had really thin leaves. people know it. Like they can tell and they go, man, I grew these out. Dude, they just outperformed everything. They just take over the garden. They're insane, you know? So they like, what do you do to them? You know, people think I do something, like I give them something special or whatever. No, it's like, just try and work with the best things you can find. And then, so especially when they're very different, when you put those two together, you're going to really see some shocking results. And if they're stable, both parents are stable, then you have a true F1 hybrid rather than hybrid of a hybrid making a polyhybrid, which is most of everything right now. But there are some places doing true F1s again. It's funny because I see these come out in the last year or two, and the people saying, oh, we've released the first true F1s with stable parents. I'm like, yeah, no, you did that 25 years ago, you know? But you just laugh because they'll think they've reinvented the wheel.
And sunflower, where I think the parents are, is it Post Malone? The mother is
Yeah,
Post Malone?
the mother was a Post Malone, the same Candy Hurricane father, or, you know, Holland parent, let's say. And the Post Malone was a little stouter plant and a little hashier nose, let's say. It was a little more compact. Yeah, very different plant than the legendary OG Punch. Plus, the legendary OG Punch was the flower was more of a light green, and the Post Malone one was way darker green. You know, they were different shades, different smell, different taxonomy, very different plant. Yeah. But in good potency. I think the sunflower growing out, I think, has been a little more finicky than the others. So the people that I've heard, you know, I've got a lot of people doing testers of them in different environments. And the one that a few people told me, oh, I had to baby that one. It was a little more delicate, but at the end of the day, smoked well.
And could you tell us about the sour cherry? The mother is Gary Payton with Larry Chimes.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that one was sent to us from an American breeder that just not mailed them to us, but actually gifted them to us in Thailand. And that was Dutch Blooms. And he's a nice young grower. I met him at the 25th anniversary for Vancouver 420 event. So there was a big 25th anniversary, and that was a riot, that 420. And anyway, that's where I met him. But he gave us quite a few things to try out. And that was one that made the grade as a potent plant that had some commercial appeal. You know, it had the tight buds. It was very modern cannabis, let's say. It had a very modern West Coast look to it, you know, and a little more purple color. So very, very distinct from the other ones.
Is that good for outdoor also? Sour
Outdoor
cherry?
is a big world, so it depends where you are. Somewhere it'll be good for outdoor. I can't say everywhere it'll be good for outdoor because it really depends where you are. So I'm hoping to hear back from the testers who have been receiving these to try them out in different environments. We have people checking them in Hawaii or Jamaica, outdoors in Canada next year. You know, again, outdoors in Canada and Hawaii are very different, you know, and even in Canada it's huge. So outdoors in Canada is still not really telling you anything until you line up where. But the best place to grow outdoors in Canada by a long shot is the very southern tip of southwest Ontario. And most of the Canadian border with the States is at the 49th parallel, but it dips down in the Great Lakes there. So there's like this little triangle that comes down, and the bottom of that triangle is the 42nd parallel. And that's the same latitude as the Northern California, Southern Oregon border. So you have exactly the same photo period. You don't have the same season. You have different weather patterns and everything. It's not the exact same place, but it's comparable because it's at the same latitude. So at least on that, it's the same, you know? So your season could be longer or shorter, you know, based on how close to the ocean you are and things like that too. And still to this day, some of the best I've ever smoked in my life. I've grown outdoors back there. But that was, you know, like grown within 2 hours of Detroit, let's say, you know. So, and some of it even closer, probably like an hour to Detroit or something. But so it's very close to Michigan, um, Ohio. Those places, you know, they can grow some fantastic herb. The best American weed I ever had was from Ohio. 'Cause everybody's like, oh, California's got the best. I'm like, well, I've had some great California weed. I've had some great Hawaiian weed. I've had some great Oregon weed. But still, the best American weed I ever had was from Ohio. I kid you not. So anyway, so it's not to say I didn't try everything everywhere. You can do good weed anywhere, and it's, or at least on the same shelf, you know? So you can do that in Australia, you can do that in California. You can grow great Pinot in Burgundy or in Oregon, you know, or in New Zealand, but it doesn't mean that it's all good, you know, from any place. There's the bad, there's the good, the excellent, and the mediocre, let's say, you know? So weed's the same way. You can say, oh, all Mexican weed is brickweed. That's not true. I've had fantastic weed in Mexico, but it's not what comes in a tractor trailer to you in Indiana, you know? That's different, you know? You can't really compare those commercial bales of seedy brickweed that's all brown with fresh Mexican that's done right. The best I ever saw in Mexico was from a young Mayan guy in the 80s. It was purple and frosty, and I haven't seen wheat that good in Mexico since then.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
What are the best conditions for growing gargoyle? The mom is Mean Mug, and she's with cherry pie lime.
That's right. That's another one from Dutch Blooms. And I never saw cherry pie lime on its own, but a lot of the stuff he sent or gifted us was it was all crossed cherry pie lime, I think, most of it. So there was this Mean Mug cherry pie lime. The Mean Mug was a little more on the rotten meat side, if I recall, but had a real good potency to it. So I looked at the Mean Mug. I was in Bangkok the last time I was there. My partners picked me up at the airport with a pickup truck full of coolers with weed packed on ice, all sealed up. So we open these coolers at the airport, and we're taking out bags of weed at the airport to get smiled at the picture. It's just wide open legal to do it, so it didn't matter. But he said, before we go back to the farm, we got some deliveries to make. So we went to drop off some herb at some shops sort of in peripheral Bangkok neighborhoods where there's no tourists and it's really just the local market. And I remember the guys being so excited when we showed up because they knew, you know, we had special weed that looked a little different than everybody else's and different flavors and that. And I remember sitting down with those guys, and that was what we pulled out. We had a bunch of varieties with us, but we pulled out the Mean Mug first, and because they were asking for it, they loved it. So they chopped it up and packed a bong, and I remember he just got off a direct flight from Vancouver, so it's a long trip, 17 hours in the plane. So you just get out of there, you're kind of feeling a little wonky, and then I go and have some bong hits with these young Thai guys, and it was the Mean Mug, and I remember being really high, just like, fucking high. What was that again? That was the Mean Mug. Oh, yeah, that was the Mean Mug. Yeah, I like that. And it was, again, a very compact plant, you know, that had really tight, rock hard buds, which is kind of the fashion right now. It's like harder the bud, the better. You know, a lot of people like that. That's kind of fluffy bud isn't popular right now. If people can see a bud that looks fluffy, they don't want it. But if it looks like a bunch of frosty rocks, they're like, yeah, that's what we want, that hard bud.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
I'd love to learn about True Kush.
Well, I've never grown it, so I don't have it. firsthand to say, but I've seen the testers grow it out, and it is really what we are saying it is. It's, true Kush. This proper Afghan / Pakistan village, border region Hindu Kush. So that's the foundation of all indoor, basically. The foundation of all indoor is that, because people they didn't start growing weed indoors until they had Afghan already, which is Afghan came back to the West Coast of North America and got crossed into all the Mexican and Colombian and Thai that people started with, but it wouldn't really finish. Then once they got this Afghan and they're like, whoa, this totally finishes big fat buds, and they totally ripen in time, and they're heavy, they're frosty, they're stronger. And then they started crossing that with the other stuff, right? So how you end up with skunk, basically, which was sort of the first famous modern hybrid that became a household name, right? So that was, if memory serves, I think it's Acapulco Gold, Colombian Gold, and Afghan. I totally space on it, but but that's and the guys that bred skunk, Sam the Skunk Man, did enough work on it to stabilize it pretty good. And then that became crossed with all kinds of other stuff, where somebody else was breeding Northern Lights at the time, and that was pretty much out of Afghan stuff. And that's really the foundational building blocks of all the modern lines. And they've had, sure, other stuff happen along the way too that's been introduced. But those were really the big ones right out the gate, let's say, that set the stage for modern cannabis gene pool. And for people to have a chance to grow proper seed from that region, I think it's a beautiful thing. Oh, there's other people collecting it as well. And there's lots of different villages, and every farmer's got seed that's been in the family for centuries, or that they picked up from their neighbor, or that they picked up when they went across the country. Or the northern Afghan stuff is generally a little different from the southern Afghan stuff, which is slightly different from the Pakistani stuff. So you're going to get a real range, but it's so much intermingling of them always happening that it's more of a regional gene pool. So it's not so much about, like, some of them will have very distinctive characteristics that you'd expect from that gene pool. You're going to get a range, but the beautiful thing is they're hardy plants. You see all the testers' reports have come back. They have big, fat, wide, huge leaves. That's with the true Kush is a great example of authentic Kush genetics. And we've put them out at a totally rock bottom price, which I think scares a lot of people, that they think, oh, they can't be good if they're that cheap. But the fact is, we've got access to volume, and they're such a unique offering in that they are foundational seeds, basically, of what's out there now. It's like being able to go back in time for people to trace it back to the roots and say, hey, what does this stuff taste like on its own? What's the true Kush, before it's been crossed with anything else? So, and hash washing, sifting and washing for hash is all the rage. And these plants are true hash plants. They never harvested this for flower. They don't smoke flower. They just smoke hash. They're not going to be disappointed in the potency or taste. It is the real deal. And we've also packaged these same seeds under our other brand, La Sagrada Semilla, because La Sagrada Semilla was developed as a brand for carrying all this heirloom or potentially landrace collectibles. I like to think of these as heirlooms because they're coming from farmers. It's not like they were wild at the side of a river bank high in the mountains somewhere, that land races and even plants that have gone feral. It's before they were domesticated, whereas these Kush seeds, they're domesticated. People have been growing them for centuries at least, and they've just been in that region. So it's not like they're totally isolated and stabilized in each village, but each village usually has some variation as well. But they're all part of one big family, basically.
This is great. Have we had any feedback from
Yeah,
the growers? Yeah.
yeah, definitely. We'll have to show you some pictures. And there's more growing them right now. There's a guy in Germany posting steady pictures of, I think he's got sunflower going on, but they look really healthy. They're in a living soil bed. Can't think of his handle off the top of my head, but every week or so I'm seeing an update on X from him. But yeah, they're out there. There's people growing them, and the buds that have been harvested by the first testers have looked pretty good. So after the testers, once I have a bunch of testers approve some lines, they say, hey, I love this one. Then we'll release it, So there's still, even though they're now released, there's still tester reports to come in, So it's ongoing fun to see, because it's really a pleasure to see the different ones in the different places. And we just sent some to 4 farmers in Jamaica, in different parts of Jamaica. And it's actually 17 degrees north, same as the farm in Thailand where they were bred. But in Thailand, they're in a greenhouse. But in Jamaica, they'll just be in some outdoor spaces. And hopefully, if they get them up and going and they're sending me solid reports and then they look worth my while, I might take a trip down there and go visit and check out all the plants. Some of them are really keen, and they're happy to keep sharing the data with you and the pictures and the videos of the plants as they grow. Then it's worth my while to send them a lot more testers, because I want to host what I call my living library exhibits, which I've only done one so far, but these are everything I've collected and that people have shared with me. I had people sharing with me over something I call the Million Seed Search. And I said, listen, if you send me the seeds, we'll get you back pictures and grow reports of them, lab work if we bother with it. And you're welcome to visit once everything's ready. We'll do a demo garden called Living Library, so you can see the whole gene pool alive at once. And once we know the finishing times, we'd even stagger plant them, so that if you just showed up, say, the first week of December, all these different types would all be finishing. They'd all be like a week from finished at the same time. So you could see an enormous variety. And we've done this once already, and I'm going to continue to do them. And the one I'm planning in Ghana, rather than just in rows like I've done them before, and I might have, these rows are Southeast Asia, these rows are, India, these rows are North Africa, South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, all these different collections showing up in different parts. In Ghana, what I've told my partners I want to do, and they've agreed, is I want to make a field into a map of the world. Right?
Wow.
So there's some classic Florida ones you'd have planted in Florida, or in Alaska, you'd have the Matanuska thunderfuck, the Alaskan thunderfuck up. So you could have the whole world. Like in Thailand, you're going to have 10 different Thai ones, So you can make a map of the world that is like a cannabis map of the world. If you're in Mullumbimby, Australia, you have the Mullumbimby madness, So there's all these crazy, that's a crazy plan, but it's also a lot of fun. And even, do I need to do that? I don't need to do it. I want to do it, I can grow them out in rows and learn just as much about them. If they're Laotian or Cambodian or Vietnamese black, in Vietnam, you'd have different ones, right? So I can check those. It doesn't matter if they're in rows, but I want to make it like fun, like not a corn maze, but a world of weed, So I'll invite, you know, academics that I respect in the world to see it, but also just sort of aficionados too, like sort of getting the golden ticket to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, like come and see this. This is going to be exceptional, and make it very photogenic. So that if you put the drone up, you can see the world of weed, and then you could be standing in it and you could walk around the different continents and check out different herbs in different places. It'd be fantastic. But yeah, we might have to make the West Coast large because so much comes from the West Coast. It's going to be hard to fit it all in. But yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be a sight to behold. It's a publicity stunt in a way, but I don't want to be so cynical about it because it's not just that, it's also church. Like you feel special to be there. I feel like I'm in church just having them in rows. I just thought having them put out over a big, like, extended global map, it would just be obscenely cool. And it would be so fun to spend a couple weeks there just going around watching them finish, because they are all, every week they're a little different and the smell evolves usually from halfway in flowering to the end. It's not really the same. You like to pick out, for me, it's all about smelling it. I love to smell it, so many, some of them I can't stand the smell of, some of them I can't get enough of it, but I'm rarely indifferent to them. Sometimes if it's just meh, it's not good. I'm just like, oh well. So certain ones that don't appeal to me, other people really like. Honestly, like my shishkaberry. To me, it's one of my favorite hash plants. Even I would say my favorite hash plant. Which is hard, because I like some for different reasons, but shishkaberry is an immaculate hash plant. And that's what I get asked most to re-release is people want more shishkaberry. They always want more shishkaberry. It was just such a fantastic plant for hash, and that's because of its Afghan roots.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
For the new year, I was wondering if there's people who are thinking of starting grow for
Well, it
if they had
where.
a New Year resolution.
Yeah, if your New Year's resolution is to plant some herb on your backyard deck or your balcony or something, you'll really be starting into a fun little hobby, and you can learn to make something with anything that you grow, basically. I mean, if it's not perfect for flour, it's perfect for cooking with, so you've got to remember that. You've just got to think, hey, it's whatever I do is better than nothing, but, if it does turn out really dynamite, you'll be so proud. But even if it just turns out middling to average, you can infuse cooking oil with it, which doesn't require extraction with flammable solvents or anything. It's literally just cooking the weed in cooking oil and straining it out. And if the grass is really weak that you're using, like it's just leaves or something, maybe you want to do that 3 times with the same oil. And you might have to add a bit of oil to top it up, but you cook 1 part leaf in 1 part oil, strain and press and get it as dry as you can. That'll turn your golden cooking oil into light green cooking oil. Then put in the second part of cannabis into that same oil. Cook it again, low simmer for half an hour. Take it out, press it dry, put the oil back in the pot, put the last third of your pod into it, and you might need to top it up a little bit at that point because you're always losing some oil in the pressing process because the material, you're using dry material that is suddenly soaking wet with oil. So you're always losing some to your biomass there. But you cook it down 3 times, then it goes from gold to light green to dark green to black. There's just like used motor oil by the end. You could have 5 gallons of oil from one plant. Like really, right? You do a big stock pot. But in that 5 gallons of infused cooking oil, you just use a 1/4 cup when you're making a pan of brownies or squares where it says use a 1/4 cup oil, 1/3 cup oil. You use that oil and you're cooked. You get totally medicated from that. Or I might make green eggs and ham, just in a frying pan. and you could throw some in, just a tablespoon in the frying pan, and an hour or two after breakfast, you're going to feel like you're floating a little bit, you know? And I've fried potatoes in it. I've made potato chips in it, you know? You can use cooking oil for so many ways of cooking, right? But if you just have plant material infused into cooking oil, it doesn't have to be picture perfect flour. It can just be whatever. It can be your male plants, you know? It literally works. And to me, that's the most, waste not, want not approach to for the average person with no equipment other than a kitchen to turn crappy weed into something great, you know? So it's totally effective to use it that way. Totally effective.
Can you make it? I'm wondering if you can
Yeah,
make
you can
butter.
use butter, you can make ghee. Absolutely. You can use any oil, but the hemp seed oil is nice to use because it's way more expensive generally than like sunflower seed oil. But the arachidonic acid in hemp seed oil, which hemp seed oil is the highest source of arachidonic acid of any of the oils, it actually helps the cannabinoids pass the blood-brain barrier. It carries it through. So it's actually one of the most efficient oils to deliver it to your head. But it doesn't matter. You can use coconut oil or sunflower oil or whatever you want. It's vegetable oil. Especially if you're making 5 gallons, you don't want to buy some fancy, expensive oil. Just whatever you just normally would use. But you can give away those jars. Like if I have a mason jar of that, like a quart mason jar in the fridge, and I'm the only one in the house that uses it probably lasts me a year, you know, even more. But but from just one plant, I might have 5 gallons of that oil. So you give away the jars. You can't possibly use it all yourself because it's such an efficient use of all this stuff that mostly I don't even bother because I just have stockpiled so much and I can just take a pinch of hash or whatever, cook it in butter, I'm good to go, you know? So since I'm the only one that uses it, I haven't made it in a while. So I usually just compost all the leaves. But when I was younger, and also times in the summer would be drier because a lot of people shut down their indoor grows. So there was always times during Prohibition, like in the 80s and 90s, so by by July and August, cannabis wasn't as easy to get as it was other times of the year. And the summer prices might go up because it was harder to find. They'd be like, oh, the town's pretty dry right now. I can remember like back when we were teenagers and stuff. It wouldn't happen in the fall, winter, or spring, but in the summer, sometimes it happened. And that's when I would be harvesting, once I started growing when I was like 18, I'd be harvesting my males in the middle of the summer. Most people just throw them out, but I'd be like, let's try and make some edibles from it and see if it works. And I made that 5 gallons of oil, and like 10 of my friends couldn't finish it in a year, Like I gave everybody jars to take home. It was
Does it have a
crippling.
sell-by date?
If you keep it in the fridge, it lasts a long, long time. But once you've cooked oil, it's not as stable, so it can go rancid, right? So, so you want to refrigerate it once you've cooked it. But I mean, I've had those over a year old that I used to the end, and they were good. But it was amazing because just a spoonful, if I was making some fried potatoes or something in the morning, I'd put a spoonful of oil in there. If it was just me eating it, if I was cooking for my family, I wouldn't put it in. But if it was just for me, no problem. And I just love the feeling of edibles. You have a very different effect from edibles compared to inhaled, because your liver processes it differently. It's hydroxy 11, but but it's a different stone, and I feel like I need both to be properly stoned. Some friends that just can't do edibles because they're just like, it's too strong. And when you smoke it or vape it or dab it, it goes away. It goes away in an hour or two, you're pretty much back to normal. Whereas when you eat it, you might need a good day and a half or two to finish your system. So it just lingers and lingers, and you just like, you might be totally screwed up for about 12 hours or something, but the next 12 hours you might not quite be back yet either, you know? You can eat way too much, and I've definitely done it. Where in Canada, the legal dose is considered 10 milligrams. So they can't sell more than 10 milligrams even in a package. So they might sell two gummy bears that are 5 milligrams each in one package, and it's $7 or something. It's an absolute ripoff. You know, it's the biggest markup in the dispensary is in those edibles for sure, by a long shot. The Because the oil can be made from anything, and the distillate oil, which is 90% THC typically, that's wholesale. That's down to a couple grand, I don't know, 2 to 4 grand, $2,000 to $4,000 a kilo, right? So you've got 900 milligrams in a gram. So how many gummies can you make, right? You could have 90 packages from 1 gram of oil, right? You're buying it for, $2 to $4 a gram, that oil, and then you're making it into gummies and then charging $700 a gram. So it's a massive markup in the edibles department. So it behooves people to learn to make their own. And once you do, that's, you realize, oh, this costs nothing. I don't buy dope. I grow my own. And I think, my God, why would I pay that much for it when I can, like, cherry tomatoes? You're saying my cherry tomatoes, if I make them into gummies, they would be worth thousands of dollars? That's crazy, right? If that's a $5,000 cherry tomato plant, if I have to buy those tomatoes from the store, you'd never buy them because you know how cheap and easy it is to grow them. You'd be like, $5,000 for that box of cherry tomatoes? No, thanks. That's how I look at it. No, it's the ganja. Be like, you can make your own edibles so much cheaper if you just grow your own. And even if you don't grow your own, you can still make them cheaper. You can buy the weed and make the edibles. So it's a personal thing. Most people, they just can't be bothered.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
Steve, thank you so much. I mean, it's always wonderful listening to
Thank you, Hina.
and I mean, it would be lovely to see you again in the new year. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, can they subscribe to your newsletter?
Yeah, we've got a newsletter at breedersteve.com. We're just in the process of switching from the old website to launching a new one. So depending when you see this, you may or may not be the new site already. But yeah, there's a newsletter sign up there regardless. And I believe the email there's contact@breedersteve.com. And that gets through to my assistant, who will redirect you if needed. And if there's something he can help you with, he'll help you with it, So that's it. You can find me raising hell on X too at breeder_Steve, I believe. Hey, it's great chatting with you. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season and a very happy new year.
Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to the next episode with Breeder Steve. Look after yourselves. See you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.